Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
Hello and welcome to Your Take. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, James Ewen. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel with all our interviews with guests from different backgrounds, discussing their careers and their journey, all through their perspective. On today's Your Take, I'm joined by a guitarist who lives in Las Vegas. My guest grew up in Michigan in the 1960s and 70s. His musical education involved 2 years study at college and going on to take a degree in music arts with a major in guitar performance. In 1981, my guest moved to Vegas and in a short time built a reputation as an in-demand guitar player. He played with R&B singer Doris Troy, Billy Preston, Little Anthony and the Imperials, before going on to play in the house band the Penn and Teller's Sin City Spectacular TV show. My guest has gone on to work on 2 highly acclaimed musicals, Mamma Mia and Jersey Boys. He's gone on to release 2 solo albums, Orleans to London and Jimmy McIntosh and. On these albums, my guest demonstrates his range of guitar playing and styles. He also plays alongside a pedigree of fine musicians, including guitarists John Scofield, Mike Stern, and the Rolling Stones' Ronnie Wood, who he is close friends with and a mentor. Today I'm joined by Jimmy McIntosh. We discuss Jimmy's musical roots, his big move to Vegas in '81, the live music scene, musical collaborations, and surrounding himself with the creme de la creme and music royalty. A very warm welcome, Jimmy.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you kindly for joining me for Your Take. With the introduction alone, there's a lot to discuss, so many stories, and we'll obviously pinpoint your journey and musical career from the very beginnings to date. Can we turn the clock back to begin with, Jimmy, and go back to the very beginnings? I'd like to find out about specifically your upbringing. Can you tell me when and where you were born and give us some background on your parents and just tell us who they are, what they did for a living, and do you have any siblings?
Sure. I do have, I'll start with the last part first. I have a sister who's a year older than me, Julia, and my parents, Woodrow McIntosh and Ann Boyd, then became Ann McIntosh. They met in Las Vegas in the 50s. And so my roots are sort of in Las Vegas in a way. My grandfather, who I'm named after, built the first permanent building in Las Vegas, a place called the Arizona Club. It was a saloon when Las Vegas was just a train depot, and they sold off plots of land to turn it into a town. He bought this plot of land, built the first building, which was a saloon called the Arizona Club. So I never got to meet him as he passed away before I was born. But my dad, after World War II, he flew in the war, and then he came back to Vegas and was a dealer at the Flamingo Hilton, which Bugsy Siegel owned, the gangster. It was like one of the first big casinos. And then years later, he met my mom when she was a school teacher out of college. So they got married. My dad then, my parents moved to Brazil, Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was born there in 1958. And we lived there until 1965, and then moved back to the States. And then we ended up in Michigan, southern Michigan, right on the Michigan-Ohio border, because there was a Kaiser plant in Toledo, Ohio, and Kaiser built Jeeps, which my dad worked at Jeep in Brazil. So we ended up in the States. My parents split up, unfortunately. So we just sort of ended up in Michigan. And so that's where I did most of my growing up. Now I'll backtrack to Brazil. So I was born in 58. The Beatles took over the world really in 64, Britain before then, but for, after they came to America in February 64. And then in Brazil, we went to an English speaking school, and all of a sudden overnight, kids were wearing Beatle wigs, the older kids. I was like first grade maybe. And then during the lunch break in cafeteria, they allowed kids to play Beatle records. So all of a sudden this thing took over the world. And then the movie A Hard Day's Night came to Sao Paulo, and I got to see that as a little kid. So that did it for me. I'm a little kid, about 5 years old or so, 5 to 6. And I wanted a guitar, and that started it. So I got a little nylon string guitar, which was too big for me. So I was we moved to the States. Growing up, my parents divorced. We didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't start getting albums of my own until about the 6th grade, and I'd get about 1 album per year, maybe 2, one for your birthday, one for Christmas. And then I rediscovered the Beatles hearing the White Album. That was, I think, going into the 6th grade. And then I always liked them, but I didn't have all the records and things like that. So then I got way into the Beatles, and then had to backtrack and get Magical Mystery Tour and Sgt. Pepper and Rubber Soul. And then, so that's when I got kind of reintroduced to them, and they became huge. And let's see, anytime you want to interject, please feel free. You can stop me.
You've given us a plotted history of growing up in South America and then emigrating to the USA to Michigan. And you've spoken about how the Fab Four kick-started it all for you, your obsession with music. I want to tap into that and find out, do you come from a musical family? And if so, what sort of music was being played in the household growing up? And can you also share with us the music that inspired you and made a huge impression, other than just the Beatles as an inspiration?
Sure. My mom played piano pretty well. My dad was not a musician, but he was a very naturally talented guy, and he could play a few tunes on the harmonica, and he wasn't afraid to sing a little bit. So he was musical, even though he was not a musician per se. Musical enough that I didn't learn this until shortly before he passed away. He wrote a humorous country, a cowboy song that he sang for me at when we were camping one time. My wife and I would meet my dad and his wife up in northern Nevada, and so he was a naturally talented guy, and I always thought he could have been in show business. So there was that, and my dad was he was a very good kind of a natural artist. I mean, with a pencil, he could draw things. He could draw airplanes, buildings, portraits even. So he was talented. So there's that, a little bit of an artistic slant. I remember as a kid going to a movie in Brazil and seeing this John Wayne movie, Hot Tari. And there was a song, it was about, they were in Africa and they were rounding up African animals like zebras and things. And there was a song called The Baby Elephant Walk. And it was actually, I listened to it as an adult and I was curious, and it's a blues. Excuse my singing, but I, as a little kid, like 4 or 5, I just loved that song. So I liked music, I remember that song, The Baby Elephant Walk. It's kind of funny.
We've established so far that you spent the majority of your childhood growing up in a small town in Michigan. Mm-hmm. What are you, casting your mind back, what are your memories from your junior high school years? And can you discuss your early encounters with music, where you begin initially playing the French horn, given to you by Duke Ellington, which is a story in itself, and discovering the guitar at the age of 14?
Well, I had that old nylon string guitar. It was a cheap guitar, but it was playable, and it was that I got in Brazil as a little kid. It was too big for me to play. And in 7th grade, I pulled it out and learned a few open string chords, like C and G, and the cowboy, just a few cowboy chords, maybe 3 or 4 if I'm lucky. And then this kid in my well, let me before I go there, I'll try to go in chronological order. So I did pull the guitar out and tried to play a couple of Beatles songs with sheet music that showed the chord diagrams. And then 7th grade, I went to the movie theater with my mom and my sister, and there were 3 theaters, Cinema 1, 2, and 3. And they were going to see some movie I wasn't interested in, like maybe a Barbra Streisand movie or just something I didn't want any part of. And I looked up on the sign, it said the Rolling Stones, Gimme Shelter. And this is 1970. And I thought, ooh, I'd heard about the Rolling Stones. I wasn't familiar with their music. And I heard that they were like kind of the bad boys. So I thought, well, I'll go in there. And they let me in the movie, even though it was rated R, and I was 11 going on 12, maybe 12 years old. So I knew the name of the band and heard a little bit about them, but I sit there, and then I'm sure you've seen that movie, Jumping Jack Flash is the first song live in Madison Square Garden. And I was like, oh my God, it just blew me away. And I remember thinking, well, this is different. And I thought, I love the Beatles, but I don't think the Beatles could do this. This is something else. It had that blues. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but it was the bluesy rhythm and blues side. It was raw, that the Stones had, that the Beatles had some of, they did, but more coming from Chuck Berry and Little Richard, not necessarily from Muddy Waters or, the deeper blues. But I was blown away and thought, my gosh. And I was sitting in the theater, and it was me in this big theater, probably held 500 to 800 people in there. I think there were 2 people in there, me and maybe 1 or 2 other people. It was empty. And I just thought, my gosh, it was just great. And I didn't really understand the tragedy at the end of Altamont. I didn't know, is this acting or is it a real thing? At the time, being a kid, just at 11, I didn't realize it was a documentary. But so that was my introduction. In fact, the movie started a second time because the other movie my sister and mom were in was long, so I got to see it almost at least 1.5 times, and then I just loved it. Told my friends, boy, we got to go to see this movie again. I told my buddies about it in the little neighborhood I grew up in. So that was my introduction to the Stones, and it just took me by storm. Now, fast forwarding from there, in junior high, I could play a few chords, and there was a kid in my school named Jeff Zimmerman, and he could play Stairway to Heaven, So I asked him, hey, if I come over to your house, could you teach me that, that introduction to Stairway to Heaven? So I walked to his house about 2-3 miles away. I was on a little journey, and he showed it to me. So that was an important spark to get me going. I was learning that opening to Stairway. And then I discovered David Bowie with Ziggy Stardust. And I got a David Bowie songbook and started learning some of the songs from Ziggy, with open chords and things like that. And then from there, I didn't know how to play lead stuff at all. Now I played French horn from 7th grade through high school. And that's another story I can back up to. But in 10th grade, there was I noticed that before the school started, there was a jazz band rehearsing, a school jazz band. And I peeked through the window, and there was a guitar player in that band. I thought, ooh, I'd like to get in this band someday. I kind of made a little mental note or a mental goal. And so that kind of got me started, where I took some lessons from a really great guitar player named John Justice in Toledo, Ohio, which was just about 4 or 5 miles across the border, or 4 or 5 miles from where we lived in Michigan, which was almost right on the border of Michigan and Ohio. So that kind of got me getting more serious with guitar, was that. Now the French horn, how that came about. My parents were divorced, and we're in Michigan, but my mom would come to Las Vegas maybe once every year or two for a teacher's convention, as she was an English teacher. So she came out to Vegas, and I think, well, a couple, 2 or 3 times. It must have been about 1967 or 68. And she was in the coffee shop at the International Hotel, the one that Elvis used to perform at. And she was at the coffee shop late at night. I don't know how late, but Duke Ellington walked by her, and she had a bunch of lettuce because she had gotten me a pet desert tortoise. And he said, oh, he mentioned something about this big head of lettuce she had, which was he just made a comment. And she said, oh, it's for this, I have a turtle for my son. So that's how she met Duke Ellington. They started a conversation, and I don't know if you can see this. I have it right here. So they were chatting, and then they exchanged information. And not long after that, this is a invitation from the White House. I don't know if you can see that or not.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
It says it was an invitation for my mother to be Mr. Ellington's guest at the White House. And and then she didn't go. And my sister and I, we had seen this thing on like an old time cartoon show that would show cartoons from the 20s, 30s, 40s through Bugs Bunny. And there was a thing called the Perfume Suite where Duke Ellington was playing, and these perfume bottles pop open and these little puppets ran around his piano. And we had seen that as a kid. That's how we knew of Duke Ellington, was from this thing that was shown on this cartoon show. So anyway, so my mom didn't go to the White House because we said, why wouldn't you go? And she said, oh, I didn't have anything to wear. So whenever Duke Ellington would play near the Toledo area, like Detroit, which was about 55 miles north, or Cincinnati, which was maybe, I don't know how far, maybe about 100 to 150 miles south, we would go and see him when he was in the area. So I remember the first time meeting him, and anyway, my sister and I just loved him. He was just a wonderful man. And we would go to his suite, and we'd visit with him and so on. So when it came time for me to join the band, which was 7th grade, the only way I could get in the school band, because I missed out the first introduction, which was 6th grade, because my 6th grade class was in a different building that didn't have a band. So the only way to get in the band was they needed a French horn player. I didn't pick French horn. They sort of picked it for me. So I thought, well, okay. So my mom told Mr. Ellington, and he'd call the house once or twice a week. And so he became a close family friend. So he bought me a French horn from Manny's, a famous store in Manhattan in New York City, and sent it to me. And he'd actually send a little extra money for music lessons. So he was like a long distance father figure for a few years. And I remember the night of the first school band concert that I played, that afternoon he called me to give me a little pep talk. So he was really a close friend, and we just thought the world of him. I mean, he was just a wonderful guy. So that treasure that, having known him and everything.
An incredible story, some wonderful memories, and to learn from one of the great jazz maestros as well. Amazing to hear that story, and what a wonderful thing to have in the family that you can go and share with your children and your grandchildren, all these wonderful memories. I want to move on and talk about the 6-string, Jimmy, and I want to specifically ask you what attracted you to the guitar, and were there any musical styles that you were keen to learn? And can you also, second to that, share with us your recollections of being tutored by John Justice and going on to meet and become friends with the accomplished guitarist Scott Henderson?
Well, initially what attracted me to the guitar was the Beatles, because, going to see Hard Day's Night way back in Brazil, they're running the movie, the scenes of them being chased by the fans. And for a little kid, it just looked like fun. They're running around acting silly, but then watching them with their guitars, it just looked cool, and the music was something brand new. Never had heard anything like that. as most people hadn't, but especially being in Brazil, we didn't have American radio. So that was the initial interest that, wow, a guitar, and guitars, I still love to look at a guitar. A nice guitar is just pleasant to look at, and I just love them. So that was the initial attraction. But as far as at first, like I said, I was playing just open string chords, and I just knew very little. And it was when I wanted to get in that school jazz band, because I was a reluctant French horn player. It was not a fun instrument to play. And I had braces on, so you'd have to put wax over your braces, and it was uncomfortable to play, So, I would like being in the band, but I wasn't crazy about playing French horn. I'm glad I did it. But so then I started studying with John Justice, and I went back on my own and taught myself how to read the basic notes on the guitar at the end of the fingerboard, the first 3 frets, on my own, because I knew the notes from the French horn. And this lady I took a couple of lessons from in our little town of Temperance, Michigan, and she said, okay, this is all I can show you. And she recommended this guy, John Justice, in Toledo, and where he was teaching was about 6 miles away. So I went there, and remember I was being kind of scared of him. We became great friends, like father and son. But he was from the South, and he didn't have any patience. And if you screwed something up, he'd yell at you, grab that chord, boy. What do you think you're doing? He'd yell at me. I thought, geez, this guy's intense. I thought, I can't keep taking lessons with this guy. He's scared. He's like scary, He's really. So I made sure to really have my lesson down pat. And I noticed if you had your stuff down, he was really nice. If you didn't, watch out, he'd jump down your throat. Nope, he was like that. So but he was at the time the perfect guy. He kicked me in the ass, and I made sure I was always on top of everything, and everything was fine. But it was good, because I kind of needed my ass kicked a little bit, I think, at the time. So I got into that. Now at the time, I discovered Bowie in the 9th grade with Ziggy, and then got the Hunky Dory album, and Man Who Sold the World, or maybe Aladdin Sane was the second one I got. But there was that. At the same time, I still loved the Beatles, but they were no longer a functioning band. So for me, the Beatles initially, and then the Stones and Bowie were probably my biggest rock bands or artists at the time. And then I started to discover. Actually, I started taking lessons with John Justice right about when Duke Ellington died, which was April of 1974. And right then, I was really starting to appreciate, who he was musically, and I was learning one of his tunes on the guitar with John Justice. And so I was really sad that he was not able to live another few years where I could have gotten to know him as I appreciated his music more than just as being a kid. Like when my sister and I met him when we were 5th and 6th grade, around then. But anyway, so the guitar. Then I had loved the Stones, Beatles, Bowie, and then I started to get into people like Jimi Hendrix and the Allman Brothers, and expand slowly. And then I discovered some jazz guitarists like Joe Pass, who was a great introduction, because he was a virtuoso, but you don't have to be. You can be a lay person and appreciate his virtuosity. It's so obvious. So he was a great introduction to jazz guitar. And then Wes Montgomery, I heard a little bit, but I didn't hear the best Wes stuff. At first, I heard the commercial Wes Montgomery, which is nice, but I thought, well, what's the big deal about this guy? It sounded good, but I didn't hear him where he's really playing jazz and really smoking until years later. But I aspired to go to Berklee College of Music in Boston, where you could major in guitar. So I went to Berklee for my first 2 years of college, then the University of Michigan for my 3rd and 4th year. But then, as I was going, about my senior year in high school, I was starting to learn about people like Jim Hall and I met a friend at a summer jazz band camp, a guitar player named Tom Duvon, who's still a good friend of mine. And he introduced me to people like Kenny Burrell, and he was really knowledgeable compared to me. I just knew very little about the different jazz players. And I always kind of I almost think of it as a football or a sports mentality. I would get my favorite band or artist, and I would focus on them like it's my favorite football team, and I don't want to care about everybody else. And I was kind of, as a kid, I was sort of like that. Okay, it's the Beatles and the Stones and everybody else, I don't even want to hear about it. These are my favorites. I kind of had that mentality as a kid, and it took me a while to expand and be more open to other people. But so that maybe slowed me down. It was the Beatles, the Stones, Bowie, and then slowly with rock, I branched out. But I've gotten over that. But I'll still be very loyal to my favorite artists as a fan. I'm kind of like that.
I want to turn the clock back now to some 40 years to 1981, which was in fact the year I was born. And I wanted to ask you, what made you decide to move to Las Vegas in that year? What were your impressions of the place and its music scene when you initially arrived?
Well, I had been to Las Vegas about 3 times as a kid. As a little kid, when we first moved from Brazil, and my dad and my mom, they knew people there, so we would go to somebody's house they knew from the 50s, and the people they knew were very friendly. And so I had an aunt that lived in the Las Vegas area and a cousin. So it seemed a little bit like a little home-like, or there was people already. It wasn't, we'd meet somebody and they were very friendly because they knew my mom or my dad from years before. So I sort of liked that. And then when we ended up in southern Michigan, and then my parents got divorced. We didn't know anybody. We got to know people in this small neighborhood that I grew up in. It was kind of a rural neighborhood. There'd be a neighborhood of about 50 homes surrounded by farmer fields of crops and things, and then another little neighborhood. So it was kind of rural. But I always sort of felt like we just got stuck in Michigan. And I kind of thought, well, especially when I got interested in music and guitar, and thought I might want to be a musician as a profession. In Toledo, there wasn't that much happening. There was a couple of like restaurants that would have jazz, like a local jazz group, and there were some very good jazz players. Up north in Detroit, about 50, 60 miles, there was Motown, but that was very remote. As a kid, when you're that far away, and Detroit always seemed a little scary. There had been the riots in 1967. So Detroit wasn't someplace you would normally just go to hang out. When I was a little older, I'd go there for rock concerts, I saw David Bowie in Detroit twice, and Paul McCartney in Wings. So, but when you were a little kid, it didn't seem like something you would go to Detroit just for. But so Vegas, it seemed kind of natural. So after I got out of college, I thought I aspired to make a living as a guitar player. I thought, sure, it'd be great to be in a famous rock band. That would be, the kind of a fantasy come true sort of a thing. But I'm kind of practical. So I thought, well, maybe I could I learned how to read music on guitar, which helps to play shows and things like that. So I was practical in the sense my goal was to make a living as a guitar player first, and then anything else on top of that would be, extra, as far as being creative or doing extra projects. But my basic goal was just to make a living playing my guitar and maybe teaching somewhat. Well,
this leads on nicely to my next question about making a living from playing the guitar. Jimmy, how did you manage to build a reputation as an in-demand guitarist on the Las Vegas music scene? And can you discuss some of the performers and musicians you've worked with? And can you also talk about some of the high-profile television shows you've been involved with? And can you recall any memorable moments from those experiences?
Sure. So after I got out of college, I went to 4 years of college, 2 years at Berklee School of Music in Boston, 2 years at the University of Michigan. And I ended up with a degree in guitar, but I did not want to be a band director in a high school or anything. So when I came out to Vegas, I had very little gig experience. So this guy that I had remembered from Berklee was in Las Vegas, and his name was Sheldon Sondheim. And I don't know how I heard that he was in Vegas, but I did. And back when there was the phone books with everybody's name and the phone number in the phone book, I called him up and I said, "Oh, remember me from Berklee?" And he was playing with a singer named Lola Falana, who was like a Vegas kind of a name singer. She would open up for big names like maybe like Frank Sinatra, but I remember seeing her on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, so she was a kind of a celebrity. So he was playing with her, and I was very impressed by that. And he gave me some advice. He said he told me when I got to Vegas, he started at one end of the Las Vegas Strip and went to every hotel, casino that had a lounge and would ask to sit in, meet the musicians, and go from one place to the other and try to meet as many people as possible. So I used that as a model. I'd started to go to all the casinos, and most of the casinos would have the big hotel casinos would have a showroom with a show, like a production show, and then they would have a lounge that maybe seated 75 to 150 people, and there would be lounge groups playing not all night long, but it used to be almost all night. But maybe they would start at 8 and go until 1 or 2 in the morning. They'd have maybe 2 different lounge groups alternating. So I started to go and hang out there, and eventually I went to one at the Frontier, which was kind of a famous hotel casino. A lot of these are no longer here. They've been destroyed, and new places have replaced them. But I introduced myself to a guitar player and playing with a lounge band. He said, "Oh, I heard there's a guy named Don Dino looking for a guitar player at the Royal Americana, a little casino, kind of a C plus grade casino, not one of the top ones like Caesar's Palace." So I went there, and I just had a regular shirt on and corduroy pants, and I was between sets, and I found the guy Don Dino, and I said, "Oh, I'm a guitar player. Heard you're looking for somebody." It was very slow, and he said, "Do you want to?" I had my guitar and my Fender Twin in the car. He said, "Do you want to play the second show?" Or maybe it was the third show. And I said, "Sure." So I grabbed my amp, and I could read the chord charts pretty good, because when you play in a jazz band, like a college or a high school jazz band, you have to read. So I was able to do that, and I did a pretty good job. So he offered me a gig, and it didn't pay very well. It was $200 a week. So that was my start. But I was happy with that, because I had a part-time job in a hospital running errands for minimum wage. So I did that for a couple of months. So I was very happy to quit the hospital job and start playing music. So that was my first gig, and that lasted about 6 weeks. And then he had 2 weeks in a main showroom that paid really well. That would have been the summer of '81. It paid $700 a week for 2 weeks. And back then that was like a lot of money. But then after that 2-week run, all of a sudden he had nothing for a few months. So I was forced to join another group. And by word of mouth, just going to different there was this gig I had heard about by going to the Silver Dollar, a country and western bar and music venue. And some guy said, "Oh, this guy named Chris David is looking for a guitar player." And so I got the number, and I had to fly out to Cheyenne, Wyoming. And it was a pseudo country lounge group. And they were going to play like 2 or 3 weeks in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then travel to Reno, Nevada, which is northern Nevada, for a couple of weeks, and then back to Vegas. So I joined that group. And so now, I'd only had 2 gigs now, of Don Dino and then this guy. I always made sure to do a really good job, learn the tunes, have a good attitude, which is important, show up on time, the basic things that you do in life. So eventually, one thing led to another. So I was playing these lounge gigs. Unfortunately, there weren't that many bands that worked week in and week out. I'd get a gig for a week or two, and I would be off for a couple of weeks. So that financially, that could be tough. But I was living in a little house in Vegas that had been my grandmother's, who had passed away. It was like a tiny little house. And I moved in there and made the house payments I was making were like $160 a month. It was so cheap. So I was able to make ends meet and be working when I could as a musician. I wasn't forced to take a 40-hour week regular job. So that was really helpful. Well, I was in this cycle of playing with just a few lounge acts off and on. And then I realized I was doing a good job, but I felt as a player, I was an intermediate player. I thought, if I don't get any better, I'm going to be working these kind of gigs the rest of my days, these sort of okay gigs, but they weren't great. So I decided I needed some more study and more work. And around near that period, maybe it was a little later, I got in touch with Scott Henderson, and I studied with him. Before that, I'll say one thing. I did then get to work with the group, the Imperials, that used to be Little Anthony and the Imperials. I've worked with Little Anthony and the Imperials, but in the 80s, they had split up, and it was just the Imperials, and Little Anthony was a solo artist. I got that band. That was my first gig that would play lounges where musically I was pretty proud of it. Some of the gigs that I did in the early days were, it was a gig, but the music wasn't my cup of tea. I was doing it for a little paycheck and the experience. I mean, I was happy to do it, but it wasn't like the music that I was into. The Imperials were doing good music, rhythm and blues, soul music. It was good stuff. And from there, Pete Strobel, who you know, our mutual friend, he moved to Las Vegas from Los Angeles, and he was staying at the little house that I was staying at, which was my grandmother's old house. So we were housemates there, and he heard of this show, Legends in Concert, which was a regular production show that it was in Vegas for like 40 years, I think, now. But it was an impersonator show with Marilyn Monroe, John Lennon, Hank Williams Sr., Elvis, of course, Buddy Holly. It was an impersonator show. And Pete had heard that they might be looking for a new guitar player and bass player. So it was actually through Pete that we went to the music director's house, Terry Ryan, and we auditioned. And Pete and I both got that gig together. And so that job was 6 nights a week, year in, year out. So now all of a sudden I had a steady job, which was really great, because before I'd make $300 a week and then maybe $350 and be off for a week, or $400 and be off for 2 weeks. It was hit and miss. But now that was my first steady gig. And thanks to Pete hearing the audition, we both got that. And I was on that show for 15 years, a long time. Pete left after about a year or so. He went back to LA.
I kind of want to digress slightly, because you've spoken about your early experiences on the Las Vegas music scene and breaking into regular work and making a steady income. But another string to your bow, and we might be jumping forward a little bit in the timeline, has been working on major stage shows, including Mamma Mia and Jersey Boys. Can you discuss your role on both shows, and can you share with us some of the places you've toured and performed?
Yeah, and then I'll lead up to that. So that show that I played for 15 years, it was good for a paycheck, but it was a factory job. Luckily, they changed the show, but I knew eventually I wanted to leave that show. I didn't want my whole career to. So while I was doing that show, I joined other projects. I was in the fusion band Afterburner for a few years, and we made a CD, which is not successful, but I knew that I had to get creative projects on the side. So I did that. I didn't just sit there, I always thought, okay. Now, it was during that period that I got in touch with Scott Henderson, who I had met in Toledo, Ohio, when he moved to Toledo from Florida with a top 40 band. And I met him, I was 17, he was 21, in a music store, and we became friends. Years later, I saw that he became famous by playing with Jean-Luc Ponty in the guitar world. He became famous at that point, and Jeff Berlin. So he was teaching at Musicians Institute. I got in touch with him, and I drove to LA, and I took a few lessons with him, and that really helped me. He pointed out some things in my playing, because I could do a gig and people were going to be happy with me. I would do a good job, but I felt like, gosh, I'm just kind of stuck, kind of in a plateau. So he was really helpful. He told me, like, on a technical thing, he said, you got to play more chord tones. I mean, not scales. And, he pointed some stuff about phrasing to me. And so getting together with Scott and studying with him, and it was not every month or so. I probably over my lifetime had maybe 4 or 5 lessons with him, but a lesson with him give you enough to work on for a year. He would expect you to go and get all the stuff done. And I also took a composition lesson with Lyle Mays, the piano player from the Pat Metheny group. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they were my favorite sort of jazz, contemporary jazz, not jazz rock, but he was just a genius. So rubbing shoulders with those guys really showed me what a great, musician, like one of the best players on the planet, what that is. And that helped me work and I got to the next level or so. From that, I started really working on my playing and things that I was not so strong at. So that was important, and that got me up to be a better player. And now, while I was doing that Legends show, then I played in the Lon Bronson band. It's kind of like a Tower of Power horn funk band that I still play with occasionally. We're going to play, in fact, the end of this month, we're going to play a show. And then Penn and Teller, I was a fan of theirs in Penn. He came to the Legends show, and I had seen them on TV several times, and I was a fan. If I knew they were going to be on the David Letterman show, I would go out of my way to watch it. I really liked them, and I rented a video of theirs, and I saw that Penn liked the Velvet Underground with Lou Reed. He mentioned that, so he's in the audience, and they were going to introduce him, and I told the bass player, I said, hey, let's play Walk on the Wild Side when they introduce Penn. So they introduce him, and we start just playing ding, 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 ding. And after the show, I went out and met him because I was a fan, and he just loved the fact that we did that. He goes, how did you know that, he and Lou Reed were good friends, and he's a Lou Reed fanatic and Velvet Underground. So that's how we struck up, how we met. Turns out that he plays bass some, and so we became friends, and I'd go to his house and we'd play. From there, that's how I got on his TV show, Sin City Spectacular, which they've had many shows. That one lasted 24 episodes, I believe. It was like a 1-hour variety show. That was a lot of fun. On that show, there was one sketch I played with Slash from Guns N' Roses, which was fun. I played with Lyle Lovett, just Lyle Lovett and I played, I think it was for Valentine's Day, and it might have been My Funny Valentine, but it was just voice and solo guitar. That was fun. I played with Weird Al Yankovic on that show, and he was very nice. In fact, he had his own band, but they wanted another guitar for the song, and he hand wrote me a chord chart. Weird Al did, and for this song, he couldn't have been nicer. And I always said that I'm sorry I didn't keep that chord chart as a souvenir. I should have kept it. But that show was a lot of fun. Let's see, who else did I? Oh, Lou Reed was on. Lou Reed and his band were a guest. I didn't get to play with Lou, but I met him when his performance was done on one of the early shows, and I was talking to him on the side of the stage. And I teach history of rock and roll at the University of Nevada, and I had told him I'd started doing that, and we deal with his musical contribution to rock and so on. And he asked me about that, and he invited me and the drummer to his dressing room to hang out. And so I got to do that, which was fun. And then he and the band went to Penn's house later that night to play. And unfortunately, I had a gig from 1 a.m., 1 in the morning to 3 in the morning, and I had to leave. I couldn't stay, but I did get to hang with Lou, and I let him borrow one of my guitars that later that night at Penn's house. And he was really nice to me. Not really, that was a cool experience. I'm sorry. I regret though.
Again, some incredible stories of people you've met with, played with, and learn from as mentors as well. Move forward again in the timeline. I wanted to ask, and it was obviously part of the question as well, is how you moved on to your work with those stage shows, Jersey Boys and Mamma Mia. How did that experience come about? And can you tell us about some of the places you've toured and performed with those shows?
Well, sure. So how that came about, I finally left Legends in Concert after 15 years, and the Lon Bronson band that I played in that band starting in 1990, 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. every Monday and Saturday night, 2 nights a week. And Lon, he got a gig to be the band leader for David Cassidy. And how he got introduced to that from we did a TV show for Drew Carey, an American actor, comedian, and he had an HBO special. And Lon's band that I was in, we were the house band for this special, TV special, and that was fun. So Lon met David Cassidy, who was a guest on that. So about a year or two later, David Cassidy asked Lon to be his band leader. And I played a gig with him in Lake Tahoe, and then he was going to have a show at the Rio, a casino hotel in Vegas, with David Cassidy and Sheena Easton. And they had a show that was supposed to last up to 2 years. And then so that was my way to leave Legends in Concert, where this show was going to be every week. So I quit Legends and went over to that David Cassidy show with Lon and the band. It was a good sized band with, gosh, I forget how many horns, probably about 6 to 8 horn players. That was 2000 into 2001. That show only lasted 10 months, and then David Cassidy had a deal to play casinos around the country owned by Harrah's, which Harrah's Corporation owns the Rio in Las Vegas where the show was. So to fulfill his 2-year contract, they had him play casinos around the country, which we did. And then we got to go to the UK, which was great. I really liked that. We played the Hammersmith, and Lon is a Bowie fan too. So when we played the Hammersmith for sound check, we were playing all like Ziggy Stardust songs, which was fun. Now playing with David Cassidy, I enjoyed it, especially coming to the UK. That was the highlight. But he didn't have a lot of work. He maybe worked on the road 20 weeks a year. And I had started teaching this history of rock and roll class at the University of Las Vegas, Nevada, 2 days a week, way back in the 90s. And I was able to keep that going for all these years. And I kind of wanted to get off of the road with David Cassidy because it didn't seem like there wasn't that much work. And I had heard that Mamma Mia, the ABBA musical, was coming to Vegas. And that one, for us, the show just came to Vegas and it stayed there for about 6.5 years. So I got an audition, luckily, because it was a word of mouth thing. They maybe auditioned, I'm going to guess, about 6 to 10 guitar players. It wasn't like a huge cattle call. You had to have kind of an invite or a recommendation to audition. But I got the music beforehand as a PDF, and it was only about 5 or 6 songs for the audition. So I was playing with David Cassidy in Connecticut, and at night I was in a hotel room shedding these songs. They weren't difficult songs, but I wanted to make sure to do as good as I could, for this audition. And luckily I did a good job, and I ended up getting hired for Mamma Mia. And I played that show for 5 years. So for me, that was professionally, it was a step up because it was a union show and you got benefits. I played 3 guitars. I played an electric, I played a 12-string acoustic and a 6-string. So for each instrument you play, you get extra money because it's a union thing. So as a job, it was really, really good. The pay was a lot more than I had made in the past. And now when I did that, so that's how I got introduced to the Broadway show. Now, actually, just before I got that gig, I was playing with David Cassidy. I got the idea of making a CD. And that would have been summer of 2002. Well, I'm a big Neville Brothers fan, the New Orleans iconic band. And luckily, they started playing Las Vegas about early 90s. About once a year, they would play here. And I managed to get my way backstage and meet Art Neville, the oldest of the Neville brothers, and Willie Green, their drummer, great drummer. So I got to know them a little bit. So I got the idea of going in the studio and recording some of my own stuff. And I had made a CD with this fusion band Afterburner, which was really good musicians. So I got in touch with Willie Green, Mean Willie Green, as he's known, the Neville Brothers drummer, this iconic funk drummer from New Orleans. And I said, hey, Willie, if I book some studio time when you're in town, they were in town for like a few days, maybe a week. Could we go in? And I offered him, a little price that was fair for him, but it wasn't too much money because it was just a musician project. I didn't have a record label or anything. But it was Willie Green and Roshan Westmoreland, who had been in the fusion band I was in, this great bass player. He's like a virtuoso. So just get the guitar, bass, and drums. We went in live and recorded 4 tunes. And they were, let's see, 3 of my own tunes. And the tunes were kind of in the style of the Meters, the New Orleans funk band. And also John Scofield's album A Go-Go, which is inspired by the Meters, kind of New Orleans funk with a little jazz, a little bit of rock. That was kind of because Willie Green being this funky New Orleans drummer, that was kind of the thing I was thinking. So that jump-started my CD. And I thought, well, if it goes good, maybe I'll make a CD. We'll just try it out. And that one day we recorded 4 basic tracks. So I was pleased with that and it felt great. So that's how it started from there, that session, to make my first CD.
I want to come to the skip forward slightly again in the time frame. The year's 2006, and interestingly, the story kind of goes full circle because at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned Give Me Shelter, the impact the Stones had initially on your music, and Ronnie Wood now comes into the picture. But what made you decide to record and produce the album Orleans to London in 2006? And can you talk a bit about the creative process of producing that album, the musicians involved, and how you managed to get Ronnie Wood to come on board?
Sure. Well, it started with that session I just mentioned, that one day where the Neville Brothers drummer and Roshan on bass.
Sure.
So that's how it started. And I thought, wow, if it's good, maybe, the plan was just to go in there and record. And I thought, well, if it goes good, maybe I could make an album. So it went great. So lucky for me, the Neville Brothers were coming to Vegas about every 6 months for about a 2-year period. They were just coming here once a year. So I thought that gave me inspiration to write some more songs. And then we went next time they were in, then we would do about two or 3 songs every time they came. And Ivan Neville, Aaron Neville's son, who's a great singer, great keyboard player, organ player, piano, and he's in Keith Richards' solo band, The Expensive Winos. And there's always a Stones connection, it seems like, with me. But so we're doing basic tracks, guitar, bass, and drums live. And then I didn't know Ivan, but the Nevilles were playing at the Stardust Hotel Casino, a famous old casino. So I just call his room and I introduce myself on the phone. Hey, I've been recording with Willie Green, the drummer he's working with, blah, blah, blah. Could I maybe hire you to play organ on some stuff? And there was a B3 organ at this studio that I was working on. It was just a little local studio. So I made a deal with him and I picked him up, and gosh, I can't remember, I paid him like, maybe, because he's kind of a name. I didn't know him. Willie Green gave me a good deal per track. And maybe, I forget, maybe it was like $150 a track I was paying him or something. I had a good job. So I was, I realized that this isn't going to be a commercial record. It's more of a labor of love art kind of a project. But so I made a deal with Ivan and I pick him up. We go to the studio, and now the basic tracks were done on about, I can tell you, between 6 and 8 numbers, enough. So he and I go there, and then he just recorded over the basic tracks, guitar, bass, and drums. And it's in his style. It's in this sort of meters, funky New Orleans style. So I'm not throwing him something that he's unfamiliar with. So for me as a producer, it was very easy. It was just kind of get these great players and let them do their thing. It was that easy. I didn't have to say, do this, this, and this, and this. Just listen. And I have a roadmap of a chord chart for them to follow. So they didn't have to memorize the form, but it grew from there. So then I had Ivan, and he was just wonderful. And then Art Neville is my dear friend. He's the oldest founding member of the Neville Brothers and Meters. Art was having some health issues with his back. So then I wanted Art to play on a track. In fact, I wrote a tune called Papa Funk, which is Art Neville's nickname. So I said, hey, Art, if I come to New Orleans, would you play on something? And he said, sure. And then Cyril Neville, one of the Neville brothers, I didn't know, but I got in touch with him, just calling the hotel when they were in Vegas, and got his room and told him I'm doing this project. Could I hire him to play percussion on the whole thing? And he was a great conga player and percussion. I'm sure he's a great drummer too, but he's the guy that can take a tambourine and make it sound like a real musical instrument. He's incredible, and he's a great singer. So I'm doing the Mamma Mia show. I've got a good job. I'm able to sub out. I hire my own subs, and I can take a week off anytime I want. So they're real flexible. As long as you have a good sub, you're covered. So I flew to New Orleans by myself for a session. It was a day-long session where Cyril Neville played on. By then I had 10 tracks, I believe, done. And he played percussion on every track, not one, like 2 or 3 different takes. So one take would be congas, another take would be maybe some kind of a shaker, another would be a tambourine. So it was like an 8-hour session or so, but he played on everything, on multiple instruments too. And it really made the music come alive that much more, because we had great drums, and then you got this authentic New Orleans percussion. And Art only played on one tune, but really features him really well. So that was great. So I'm really happy that so I was on it was really exciting. It was like a musical journey, just the making of this record. So I have that, and then there's only one vocal song, but I'm not a singer, but my friend, things kind of tie together. Penn Gillette from Penn and Teller. Penn's he's a very bright man, and he's a great writer. He's written books. He can write great lyrics. So I had this little tune that I had, and it was kind of a Stonesy flavor. Penn wrote some lyrics for it, and so he and I collaborated on the song called "It Was Just a Virus." And so I got Ivan Neville to sing the tune for me. For that one, I had to go to Los Angeles and meet him there and just find a studio, which he did, and he just sings great. So now I've got I've got a lot of the Nevilles are on it. Ivan's singing on this tune. Ivan plays organ on about 8 tracks. Art just the one. But I'm feeling really good about this now, and I'm towards the end of the project. In the back of my mind, I thought, boy, if I could get one of the Stones to play on this, it would be what a dream come true. Now I had gotten Ronnie Wood's manager's email years before '94 because I bought some of his artwork, some copies, some signed lithographs from the manager. And I how I got his number was I called the Rolling Stones office, and I asked, I wanted to see if I could purchase some Ronnie Wood artwork direct, because in a gallery they're very expensive, like framed. One of his, back then in the '90s, one of his signed serigraphs or lithographs would be about $2,500 framed. So I managed to get this manager's number, and he sold me a suite of 6 Ronnie Wood signed, I think they're called serigraphs, I'm not sure, but unframed. I bought all 6 of these for $1,500, and then I had them framed myself. And so I had this guy's contact, and I kept the contact up. Eventually, when I thought, well, maybe I could get Ronnie to play on a track. Keith, I think that would be impossible, not knowing him, though I'd met him once. So I called the manager, and he's no longer working for Ronnie. He gives me Ronnie's stepson, Jamie, his contact, who is acting as Ronnie's manager. So I wrote Jamie, and I said, I'm Jimmy McIntosh. I'm making a CD with myself, Art Neville, Ivan Neville, Cyril Neville, Neville Brothers drummer. Is there any chance I could hire Ronnie to play on one song? That's how I approached it. And I thought I have a chance because of the Nevilles, to be honest with you. I got turned on to the Nevilles from reading a Keith Richards interview in Rolling Stone, where he said the Nevilles album, Fly You on the Bayou, was the best album of the year in 1981, in his opinion. Now, Ronnie Wood had a band with members of the Meters from New Orleans, Zigaboo Modalist. So I knew that the Stones, being a student of the Stones and having read everything I can, every interview over the years, I knew the Stones loved the Neville Brothers. I knew this. So I thought, well, he would never play on my record, but the fact that the Nevilles were on there, so about a week later, I hear back, Ronnie's interested in this project. Where would he do it? And it was, to be honest, it was the Neville Brothers that opened the key for that happening. If it had not been for them being on my record, he would not have considered it. So I get this email back, and I couldn't go to sleep that night. I was so excited. I couldn't have, So I told my wife and my immediate family, nobody else. I didn't want to tell anybody because I thought this probably won't happen. But about 3 weeks later, my wife and I fly to London, and then we go to, I got in touch with the engineer, or he got in touch with me, who was going to do the session. And then I sent the music to Ronnie, what I had, the tracks. And I thought, well, he might not like it. You never know. And so he did like it. And I get in touch with the engineer, Steve Bush, and he says, oh, Ronnie says he's going to do a wee session for you. And between me and you, he might want to play on more than the one song. So I'm like, wow, cool. That sounds. So we get there, and he ended up playing on 5 songs because he liked it. He didn't. I paid him, a sum that for him it's not that much money. But I wasn't going to ask him to do something for free for somebody he doesn't know, but he liked the music, and so he played the night before the session. It was at Ronnie's house in Richmond, this mansion. They'd set up a Pro Tools setup, and he played on 2 songs the night before the session. The session was supposed to start about noon on whatever day it was. This is October 2004. And so then my wife and I go there, and I got my wife's a photographer. She took a lot of pictures, and Ronnie was really nice about that. He didn't mind that at all. So he played on 3 tracks while I was there. Well, when we first, shortly after we arrived and shook his hands, and it's somebody you kind of feel like as a fan. You've read so much about him, you've read all these stories. I had got to meet Ronnie and Keith Richards back in '99 via Art Neville. So that's when I first met them, but I knew he wouldn't remember me from that. It was a brief meeting, but I got to go back and meet Keith and Ronnie, which was a big deal. And in fact, I'll show you this. It's right here. And when they signed a pick guard, excuse me, they signed this pick guard. It says to
Wow, yeah. Incredible.
Keith Richards. So Art Neville made a phone call to Ronnie's manager, Jane Rose, as a wedding gift for me. I said, hey, they're staying at the MGM Grand. They were playing at the MGM Grand Garden in Vegas. So I got to go after a lot of negotiating with his manager, and I got to go and she took me back because of Art into their warm-up room, and I got to meet them, and I was like, like that. So anyway, so this is technically the second time I met Ronnie. I didn't even mention that first meeting, to tell you the truth, because I knew he wouldn't remember. But he says Jeff Beck might show up today and want to play. He just says something like that. I'm like, what? I didn't even say anything. My eyes got big, like, what? I didn't even say anything. So Ronnie does and just about everything he played was one take, maybe two passes at the most, because he's listening to music and he's got big ears. I mean, he's an extremely talented musician. He listens, and my tunes are not, it's not like prog rock. It's not super, these tunes are not complicated. It's like feel music, but it's not easy per se, but it's not like super hard, like a lot of chord changes. It's more about the feel and interaction and so on. But he plays one take, maybe two at the most, and it just felt great. And then the lady who's kind of like the helps with their house, she comes down to the cellar area where all the music stuff was set up, and she says, "Oh, Jeff will be here in 20 minutes." He says something like that. She'd kind of keep you updated. And then, the lady's name is Jenny Taylor. She's a very nice lady. She still works with Ronnie. And then we took a break. Everything was so fast. He plays on 3 tunes in 45 minutes. It wasn't like a difficult thing. It was like easy. And we're there. And then he didn't have any headphones on. He had an amp with a mic. And then the playback was coming out of speakers, and they weren't worried about the mic picking up the playback. So I'm not going to tell them what to do. They're kind of experienced. So I'm kind of just almost like an observer, like in a sense. But I would say, okay, you could play on this, come in here, you could play a little solo here, do this or that. I mean, I would, suggest, but I tried to stay out of his way as much as possible. And I didn't want to tell him how to play, of course, or anything. So now we take a break, we go up. And he asked me if I wanted some coffee, and I said, sure. And he had an espresso machine. He's making me an espresso. And then I told him about Duke Ellington being a friend and stuff, because I thought, I'm just meeting this icon, and you want to kind of say something to maybe that he might be he might find interesting. And he really liked that. In fact, he saw the Duke Ellington Orchestra when he was a kid. So he really liked that. In fact, he made a painting of Duke Ellington, and that painting is of a poster Duke Ellington gave to my mom and us, and I gave to Ronnie. So it's kind of cool. He made this painting because of something I gave him, and I told Ronnie.
Ronnie went on to work with you again on your second album.
Yeah.
But Jimmy, I wanted to ask about your friendship, and also how much of an inspiration he's been on your guitar playing, but also as a music mentor.
Well, so the friendship, we hit it off. Really, it was after that, having coffee with him, and then and we're exchanging some stories, and then it's kind of like we became instant friends. The first part of the session was like, he's kind of looking like, well, who are these people? I don't know who these people are in my house. And then the ice was broken, and we became instant friends. And then Jeff Beck shows up, and it plays on 3 tracks. So that was like, how did that happen? But so he's on so that was great. And I wasn't able to use Jeff's name on the CD because of his manager, but he's on there. And when the CD was reviewed, it mentioned that he's on there and so on. So that was fine. I mean, I was just incredible with Jeff on there, and he was great, really nice. That night, Ronnie was, let's see, we get to his house at noon for the session. Well, that night he was going to be a guest at the Royal Festival Hall in London with Bill Wyman and the Rhythm Kings were playing.
Yeah, great band. Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. Oh, Albert Lee, I think, on lead guitar. He
Albert
was
Lee,
with them,
yeah.
at one point.
Martin Taylor on guitar as well. And,
Georgie Fame, I think, on piano, wasn't he, at some point?
I think so. I'm not exactly sure, but yeah, Albert Lee was there. So that night, and Ronnie says, "Oh, I have to go tonight because I'm going to play and such and such." Well, my wife and I got to go with him, and Jeff followed in his Corvette. So anyway, that one day between Ronnie playing and now Jeff Beck played on 3 tracks. And now we're going to the gig we're in the back of the car with Ronnie. So I had to pinch myself, like, is this really happening? And so we're now hanging with him, and we're riding in the back of a Mercedes limo so that's how it was a whirlwind day. I mean, a very exciting day. And then at the gig, well, there's Bill Wyman, and then Charlie Watts showed up just to hang out backstage. So then Ronnie introduces me to Charlie, and we're chatting, and Ronnie, besides the Duke Ellington story, my wife used to sing with a guy named Ray Anthony, who's older than me. But she got to meet Elvis Presley from that, and she had a funny Elvis story that Ronnie Wood just loved, and he would say, "Tell him your Elvis story." And I told my wife I said, "Hey, tell Ronnie your Elvis story," because I had a feeling he'd like this story, which he did. So anyway, so that's kind of how the friendship started, and then and that day was just it was incredible. So the record comes out, and I didn't get actually, let's see, that was 2004. 2005, the Stones did their Bigger Bang tour in the US, and my wife and we saw them in Las Vegas. There was an arena that they would play when they would tour. Luckily, they started to do that, and we went and saw them in Salt Lake City shortly after. I tried to visit him backstage in Vegas, but his wife said, "It's too crazy in Vegas. You got all these celebrities that want to meet them, and if you're lucky enough to get backstage, you're competing against famous people." So I said, "Well, what if we went to a show like, somewhere else like Salt Lake City?" She said, "Yeah, that should be fine." So we got to go back and visit with Ronnie, and I remember it being a little challenging because he had an assistant at the time, and I had to show her these pictures of us with Ronnie at his house to prove that we know him. And then she sort of remembered meeting us at this office. So that's when I reconnected with Ronnie then in Salt Lake in his dressing room. And I gave him this Duke Ellington poster because he loved the Duke Ellington thing. And then I said, "Hey, this would make a great painting, Ronnie. I've got it in my hallway. I could bring it in, or you want to see the painting?"
Yeah, if you could do, yeah, Jimmy.
Hang on, I'll be right back. Give me about 30 seconds. I'll be right
Yeah,
back.
no problem.
Okay, here I go. So this is a signed. So let's get this out of the way so you can see. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's incredible in that beautiful frame as well.
Yeah, so this is not the original. You see it's signed. So this was a famous it was a bust of Duke Ellington in this poster, and he was doing a music clinic at, I believe it was the University of Minnesota music department, and he had sent us this poster. So I gave the poster to Ronnie, and I said, "Hey, this would make a great painting." And then before we left, he said, "I'm going to paint it," which he did. I saw the original, but so that's that. So that's kind of neat that happened. We just put this over here. It's really cool. I'm really proud of it. I'm proud of the fact that it's my inspiration that got that painting made. That I egged him on, but like with the poster, and then suggesting that he paint it. So that was kind of fun.
Jimmy,
sorry, but I got reconnected with him then and there at that gig. basically. Sorry.
No problem. Jimmy, today we've heard so many fascinating stories about the people you've rubbed shoulders with, the people you've performed with and made close friendships with. And I could literally be sat here hours and hours listening to your story, because as a music fan and somebody that has such a passion for music and it means such a lot to me in my life, these stories are just so interesting to listen to and hear. Sadly, we're coming towards the end of our interview or conversation today, but a couple more questions. I wanted to ask you, you've obviously been fortunate enough to work with so many high caliber musicians, and I'm sure we could have covered more aspects of your career, more people you've worked with, but of these collaborations, which have been the most fulfilling and why? And who do you feel you've learned maybe the most from as a mentor that's maybe taught you musically and also giving you a direction of what the music business is actually like and how you really make a living from it, because it's such a difficult profession to get by and do well at it?
You got great questions. And if I veer, feel free to steer me back on track. Well, professionally, like I said, I just initially I just wanted to make a living. So playing, and I've been grateful just to make a living. That's hard enough, and now it's even harder. There's less steady shows in Vegas than there used to be. And it used to, when I moved here, it used to be every casino had a lounge with some little group playing there. So there was. And those groups weren't making a lot of money, but there was work, It used to be better in Vegas in the 60s and the 70s, but there was work. Now there's a lot less work. Now it's maybe one-off corporate gigs here and there. But there's less steady work. So it's more and more difficult. So there's that. Now, creatively, I've got sort of my rock sort of side, and then to me and then jazz. I'm not a straight ahead jazz player, but I've studied jazz and I still study at it. Scott Henderson has been very important, and then people like my second CD, I was fortunate to have John Scofield, who's one of my favorite artists, and Mike Stern. And I got to know them because in Las Vegas, we had a Blue Note Jazz Club for about a year and a half, around 2001. And all these guys came to Vegas for like a week at a time, like Pat Metheny, Chick Corea, this one. And I knew from living in Vegas that this isn't going to last because Vegas isn't going to support that. But so when these guys that I loved, like John Scofield or Mike Stern, were here, I was there just about every night. I got to know both of them then. And so I sent them my first CD, and they were very encouraging. And then when I did the second one years later, but they both played on 2 tracks. So my highlight was really working with Ronnie. Well, Jeff Beck was amazing, but Ronnie to me was because I did work with him twice in the studio. That if I was going to pick one thing, would probably be Ronnie, because it happened twice, and just watching how he worked. And I'm sure you've been in the studio, and the studio can be not a scary place, but when you're recording, some people get an OKG, a red light is going to be on, and everything. Let's isolate everything. You don't want any leakage between this and that. And with him, it was so loose. It was like a party. It was like, if something leaks in, it's like, who cares? It's now he's about organic music, not sterile music, obviously. But watching the way he worked was really inspiring. And it wasn't about, let's play an amazing solo with some fast runs. It was more like a painter with a paintbrush, just painting on a painting and doing little strokes here and there to make the whole thing come alive more. It was subtle. And I thought that was really an interesting way to go. It's like sometimes when he would lay something down and it sounded good, but it wasn't like, oh my God, that's amazing. music, it didn't blow you away, but then as you listen to it, whatever he played made the whole track sound and feel better. And I thought, okay, that's a deeper approach, not some guy just showing off his hot licks, So that was really inspiring. That, and then John Scofield, he was in Las Vegas with Phil Lesh and friends, the Grateful Dead's the great Phil Lesh, and he was touring with Phil Lesh and friends. And so when he was in Vegas, we went into a local studio and he played on 2 tracks. For Mike Stern, I went to LA to Tos Panos, great drummer who has a home studio, and I worked on my second CD with him as a drummer. And John Humphrey, a great bass player who I knew from Scott Henderson. So that second project was done in LA. Every few months I would go there and record a couple of songs. And Mike Stern was playing in LA at the time, and I knew him. I was friends with him. So we went and we all played together live, and that was amazing. So that whole thing was just a musical adventure. I mean, it really was. It was so much fun making those records. I didn't want it to stop. When it stopped, I was like, oh boy, I wish that would just keep going, because I was learning so much by being around these great musicians. And the nice thing, on top of it, they were all great guys, and I'm great friends with all of them. Ronnie and I are still in touch. In fact, I just texted back and forth with him about 4 days ago. So I keep in touch with him, and he's just a great guy. So I treasure my friendship with him. He's just a wonderful guy.
From being on that roller coaster ride and the sheer enjoyment of working with those people and the stories from it and those experiences, I wanted to steer away from the music just for a second or two, and away from your musical commitments. What are your other hobbies and interests? And then coming back to music again, what are your musical goals for the future? And are there any avenues of the music business you'd like to explore that you haven't so far, and why?
Great question. As far as hobbies, I play golf a little bit, and my dad was a good golfer. And I was in high school, I caddied, and my junior and senior year in college, I went to college on a caddy scholarship called the Evans Scholars. And you have to be a caddy, and you can apply for a scholarship, and it pays for a full ride if your grades are decent. My grades got better my first 2 years of college, so I reapplied and I got this scholarship. So I do play golf about once a week, and so that's a hobby. And I'm a little bit rusty now, but in fact, I'd love to, a bucket list would be playing St. Andrews in outside of Edinburgh, Scotland, the home of golf. I'd like to come back to the UK and at least play golf there. As far as now, my last steady gig was Jersey Boys, which lasted 8.5 years. And that was as a job, it was a wonderful job. The guitar spot, there were 2 guitars, guitar 1 and 2, and I played both of them. I ended up with guitar 1, where I played about 5 different instruments. And as a union job, you were paid extra for each instrument you play. And then we went on stage, we were paid extra for that. So boy, it was a great paying job. It was just really, really good. Now, as far as gigging, I'm freelancing. I have a few different people I play with, not steadily. Like I just did a show with Michael Grimm, who's you might check him out on YouTube. He won America's Got Talent, this TV show, in 2010. Well, I'm not a fan of those shows like American Idol or that stuff, but most of those people seem to be more pop oriented that win those contest shows. This guy, he's from Mississippi. He's a rootsy, earthy, or organic singer. He's blues, soul, and country, and he is a world-class talent. Great singer, good guitar player. So I play with him, and we do anything from the Neville Brothers, Otis Redding, a lot of old soul stuff. I really enjoy playing with him, but that's just like a show maybe once a month or so. And I still play with the Lon Bronson Band. We play at this same venue I play with Michael Grimm, the Smith Center, a really beautiful venue. And I have a few other people I play with. I play with this guy, Jose Pepe Jimenez, and he was the drummer in Mamma Mia. He went on to play with Carlos Santana for 2 years, about 5 years ago. He played on 3 tracks on my first CD, Orleans to London. Willie Green was on 7 out of the 10. And so Pepe and I, we've played together off and on for years. And he has this progressive Latin jazz group called Groove Culture, and it's amazing. And he's written all the music, and he's a monster talent. He's one of the best drummers anywhere. And so I'm playing with that group, which is very challenging. The music is difficult, and it's all Latin rhythms, some I've heard before, but some I was not familiar with. So there's a learning curve. That's a real challenge. And all the guys in that band are terrific. So we have a show in a couple of weeks. So, but I'm not working 6 nights a week like I used to. And I'm in my 60s now. So I'm certainly not rich, but at least I'm stable enough that I can kind of cruise and maintain the schedule that I'm at. So, and I have a couple of other people I play with. So there's a few I play with occasionally with the Dave Perico pop strings, which is really good, and a couple of other things.
You've done so much, but musically, are there any areas that maybe you'd like to dabble in and explore? So, for example, maybe composition for film, or is there anything that kind of excites you musically that you haven't tried and you think, I'd like to do that, before I'm not able to?
Sure. Well, as far as being a film composer, that would be a huge undertaking. I've got some friends that could go in that realm. For me, my writing, I enjoy composing and writing, but my stuff has been mostly geared to small group, like guitar, bass, drums, maybe keyboards, and not orchestrating for a horn section or a string section. So since I've not gone into that world, I could have done that had I pursued that. I think I have the know-how to, but the music that I like for myself is more of a small group with interaction within the band members. So if I do now, I hate to say it, but the way the music business is, people don't buy records or CDs anymore, and it's difficult. So my first CD, I had got good press from. I got in magazines like Guitar Player magazine, Vintage Guitar, Classic Rock did one thing where they had a CD of different people that had collaborations, and my tune that had Ivan Neville singing and Ronnie and Jeff Beck on was featured in that magazine. So I got good press, and the reviews were generally really good. When I did the second CD, my friend Scott Henderson, he's a friend and kind of a mentor, there was a big gap, and he told me, boy, you're going to see it's really different getting into print these days compared to your first CD, because now there's so fewer magazines out there, and the competition to get in the few that are left is fierce. So it was mostly, so I got in a Vintage Guitar magazine, a couple of magazines, Downbeat magazine, a famous jazz magazine, online. Gave my second CD an editor's pick, January of 2015. And that was a nice little pat on the shoulder, but it doesn't really do anything for you. So now with me, I knew my records were not going to be big sellers because they're not vocal records. There was one vocal, and they're not commercial. But I made music that I wanted to hear for myself that I thought would be fun to play on. And I think the reason Ronnie and even Jeff Beck, after he heard it, wanted to play it or happy to play on it is because it's fun music to play. Had it been a commercial record and really slick and produced, they wouldn't have wanted anything to do with it, I don't think. But I knew it would not be a big seller, to tell you the truth.
Interestingly, they came from an era where instrumental music was kind of commonplace in the charts, and they were probably heavily influenced by people like Hank Marvin, of course, from the Shadows, and Dwayne Eddy, who was a massive rock and roll star back in the 50s. So it's kind of interesting that they're almost going back to their roots in a sense, aren't they?
Yeah, and then of course Jeff Beck. So most of his stuff in his career was instrumental. You know, all the great records that he. But I knew. I mean, I never thought, oh, this is going to be a hit, and nothing like that. I knew it was a musician's record, a labor of love thing. You know, and so of course you always wish you'd sell more records, but I totally went in there. Had I had aspired to sell as many CDs as possible, I would have probably had to make a smooth jazz record if it was going to be instrumental to sell, but I couldn't. So musically, I was, very pleased. And then all the guys that played on it, all these, my heroes, they all liked it. And so just that, for me, that was enough.
Jimmy McIntosh, I'm afraid we come to that time. So we've spoken to around about, I think, 111 or 12 guests so far, and we always wrap the interviews with these final set of questions to establish things we've not found out over the course of the conversation. They're quick fire questions, so you don't need to think about these in any depth. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
Here we go. Number one, Jimmy McIntosh, what would you say is your favorite pastime?
I guess golf. I'm going to have to say for right now, golf. So sometimes it's not. When I play badly, then it's not my favorite. If I play good, it's golf.
I played golf from a young age, interestingly, you mentioned St Andrews. So many memories from the British Open. But do you have a favorite golfer?
I have a few. Scotty Scheffler, the guy who's number one. Or I like Rory McIlroy an awful lot. I like Rory, especially how he's been heading up the PGA, being a spokesperson, because the PGA's there's a splinter, that live golf thing. I don't know if you've heard of that. There's a splinter group, but I like Rory. I like Jordan Spieth. I like a lot of those guys.
Sure. We'll turn to cinema shortly. The two golfers that kind of spring to mind for me as we go back to kind of golf history, I absolutely love Ballesteros, Seve.
Oh, yeah.
And the other one for me, one of the top American players and an absolute gent, Tom Watson. Yeah. And probably the greatest British Open player as well, Tom Watson. Move to cinema now. What would you say, Jimmy, is your favorite film and why?
Boy, that's a tough one. I should have I thought that might come up. So, my favorite, I don't really have a favorite movie, but There Will Be Blood. There was a movie called There Will Be Blood. I like that a lot. It's not a horror film, but I'm a Gary Oldman fan. I like
Gary Oldman is a class act.
Yeah, I think he's one of the, I think he's one of the best actors ever. And then I found out Gary Oldman and David Bowie were great friends. I read that.
Some interesting choices. I like the There Will Be Blood, the Paul Thomas Anderson film, and of course, a tremendous performance by another great actor, Daniel Day-Lewis. From film now to novelists, who would you cite as your favorite novelist?
Well, I think one of I'm not as well read as I'd like to be. Not very well read, but Kurt Vonnegut. I like Kurt Vonnegut a lot. The old days. And recently, one of my favorite, novelists. That's an autobiography, so that's not a novelist. Let's see. Who's the guy that of Thomas Wolfe, the electric acid, the Kool-Aid acid test? That's not really a novel, though. Who wrote The World According to Garp? His name.
Oh, I've seen the film with Robin Williams. Yeah.
I can't. I should. know that writer's name, but I've not been reading enough novels lately.
Jimmy, if
Keith Richards is my favorite biography, right? Keith Richards' life, I think, is just an incredible book.
that is a good biography. We move to professions. If you could have had a different profession outside of music, what would it have been?
Outside of music, that's a good question. I always thought, even as a kid, I couldn't picture myself working out in an office job. I remember as a little kid when your parents say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I remember that question, and I would say, a pilot, a captain of a ship, or an artist. Those are my three choices. so maybe a pilot.
Next,
my dad was a good pilot, but yes.
Next, who would you say in life has been your greatest inspiration?
There's not one, but there's a few. My parents in different ways. My dad, in the sense that whatever he did, whatever he got involved with, he gave it 100% and got to be very good. Like, he started playing golf at age 40, and within a year or so, he was already shooting in the 70s. And if you played any golf, you know that's hard to do. And so he got to be very good, and he was a pilot. He flew airplanes in the war. And then he flew aerobatics, where he did air shows, and he was one of the best pilots in the country for the plane he flew. He was a world-class pilot. So just seeing him, whatever he didn't do it half-heartedly. If he was going to take up bowling, he was going to get good at it. You know, he did whatever he did, he was good at. Or he used to, being a Western guy, was born in Nevada, they would shoot guns and things, and he got so with a pistol he could throw up bottles in the air and hit them while they were in the air with a pistol. That's hard. So he was that kind of guy. Whatever he did, so that left an impression that you have to be, with whatever you do, try to at least, try to your best, try to be good at it. So Duke Ellington, that was a impression. A lot of it was my mom would say, "Mr. Ellington said this," and Mr. Ellington said, eventually you're going to want to play your own music. You're going to get to a point where you don't want to do other people's music, and you're going to want to do something on your own. My mom said that to me a few times. I thought, what? That was always in my mind someplace, and that actually spurred me on to try making my own records and write my own music. So that was an inspiration, from him telling my mom. So that was kind of interesting. There's that, different things like.
From those two inspirations, Duke Ellington and your dad, who seemed to have the Midas touch.
Yeah.
Now as newspapers, do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
I don't read a physical newspaper. If anytime I'm traveling, I'll look at USA Today just because if it's there in the hotel. So I'll get my news online and on television, and on TV. I'll look at I'll watch different points of view from CNN, and occasionally I'll watch Fox News too. I'll admit I'll watch that, which there's differences. So I'll watch the different points of view and biases, different. And sometimes I think the truth is somewhere in between, So
newspapers now to cuisine. Do you have a favorite food? And if so, what would you choose as your favorite food?
I don't have one. Sometimes a great, not a fast food burger, but when you're hungry, like a gourmet burger, a good quality burger can be really good. But I don't have one favorite food. I like a good salad with maybe something mixed in, like chicken or fish, something that's really healthy. I like Italian, but I sure wouldn't want it every night because it's heavy, So I don't have one favorite food. I like New Orleans food, like New Orleans jambalaya, but that's something I would want once a year or so. I like Japanese hibachi. I like that a lot.
We ask all our guests to choose their favorite cultural icon. this could be someone in music. It could be a pioneer. It could be somebody who's invented something or changed the world, or a religious leader. It could be anyone. Who would you cite as your favorite cultural icon?
Could it be a whole group or just one person?
Yeah, it could be, a series of people.
I have more than one. So, I mean, Duke Ellington, because knowing him as a person, what I did, he was just incredible human being, aside from his talent. Because my sister and I knew him as a person. And then the Rolling Stones are just huge for me. I mean, and the band as a whole, I mean, from Mick to Keith to Ronnie to Mick Taylor. For me, the Brian Jones period I didn't discover them until Mick Taylor. But they've been a huge part of my life, and they still are, as a fan. And now, I've been fortunate enough, I'm good friends with Ronnie. I've met Keith several times, and I think he's a wonderful, obviously they're incredible icons on top of the food chain, but from what I've seen, they're good men, they're good people too. Because there's a lot of celebrities that'll meet you and they'll say something, to you, but they're not necessarily sincere in a lot of cases. But
out of interest, sorry, have you met Mick?
I met Mick twice. It's a funny story. I met him once where I actually got to speak with him, and it's a little embarrassing. If you were going to make me tell a story, I will. So the first time the Stones played Vegas was '94. They played the MGM hotel has an arena. It's like a 15,000+ seat sports center, very nice. So the Stones played 2 nights on their Voodoo Lounge tour. So I went to both nights, and I went to the hotel hoping maybe I would see one of them in the casino. Because I mean, I love the Rolling. If I just say I love the Rolling Stones is like an understatement. I mean, I really, truly do. So I'm there. I'm walking around the Sunday, and this friend of mine who was a dealer in the casino, he was dealing, I don't know if it was roulette or 21 some game. And he knew I was a Stones fan. He goes, "You just missed Keith." I go, What are you talking about? Toby, this guy's name was Toby. He goes, "He was here a little bit ago." I said, "You're bullshitting me." He goes, No. So I'm walking around this is the biggest casino in the world at that time. It's huge, this place. So I walk around and I come back. Well, it was Ronnie Wood who was there gambling, and I missed it. But I'm walking around this whole place. And I was kind of on a mission. I wanted to meet one of them. So I had parked my car out in this delivery area that my friend Mark Barrett told me about when we went to get our tickets. Because back then, before the internet, this is '94, people stood in line overnight inside the MGM Grand to get tickets. And we hired one of my guitar students to do that for us for $50 or something. So my friend Mark says, "Park here. It's right outside this food court, blah, blah, blah." So I parked there. When I went to my car, I went back in. I get back to my car after spending quite a bit of time, and I'm sitting in my car, and I see 2 Lincoln Town cars pull up, like not stretch limos, but black, kind of normal sized limousines. They pull into this area. This is not by the front of the hotel where the patrons are. It's like in a loading zone. So I thought, I'm going to sit in my car here, because I'm thinking it could be the Stones. So a delivery truck pulls in between me and those 2 cars, and one of the cars left. Then the delivery truck pulls out. I see this door open the side of the building, and it's a guy with a hat and long hair. It's Mick, and he's got 2 bodyguards with him. I had a CD of that fusion band I was in, Afterburner, and our CD was like, it was so. But isn't it? I grabbed the CD as an excuse, so I walk up to about maybe 70, between 50 and 100 feet away, and I stopped. I'm not going to run up to him. And I said, "Hey, Mick, could I give you a CD?" And I hold it up so he can see I don't have a gun or something weird. And he says, "What is it?" I go, it's a CD, a jazz rock CD of a band I play guitar in. And he just goes, all right, kind of like that. So I walk up. This happened like so quick. I walk up and I hand the CD out. And I said, I teach history of rock at the university here, and I took part in an article about the Stones. And he says, I read it. What's your name? I go, I'm kind of nervous, like Jim McIntosh. And I stick my hand out. He shakes my hand. So there was this article where they interviewed a couple of guys that teach history of rock and a local DJ about the Stones playing Vegas. And they were playing it was the only indoor show in the tour, and they were charging $300 for the most expensive seats. And the article was like, are they worth it? Blah, blah, blah. And of course, so he reads this article. It was in the local newspaper. So I tell him, yeah. So that was my introduction to him, very quick. And then he's just kind of looking at me like, well, what's this guy want? And then I said, gee, I saw the shows and you were incredible. And then all of a sudden he got real nice. He says, oh, thank you. And then there's bodyguards at the car, nobody else around because it's this delivery area. So, and then I go, it hits me who I'm talking to, this hero. And I love Mick Jagger, like I do all the Stones. And then I said, I got to tell you, one of the main reasons I became a musician is because of your music. I got to tell you how much I love your music. And he was like, oh, thank you. Got very sweet. Thank you very much. And this is the embarrassing part. I thought, well, this is the only time I'm going to meet him. I got kind of choked up. I said, can I have a hug? And he goes, oh, and he kind of groans. He goes, all right. So he leans in. I got a little, like a light hug, which is totally lame. See, I shouldn't tell this on the interview because it's embarrassing. But then he had a big smile on his face and he kind of chuckled a little bit. And I said, thanks. And then I just left. And that was it. And I looked back and he had a smile as he was getting into his car, still had a smile. So as lame as that was, it was nice, so that's my
made us night, Jimmy. We go from hugging Mick Jagger now to your favorite curse word.
I never told Ronnie that story too. I'd be embarrassed, but I'm sorry. Yeah,
it's on record now. What would you choose as your favorite curse word and why?
Just an everyday one would just be just shit, probably shit, something, like instead of, that. I mean, I can curse as well as anybody, but probably just shit. But I don't like to curse too much because I think you can overuse cursing,
What would you choose next as your favorite place or holiday destination?
Geez. Well, culturally for the music, I really loved going to New Orleans just because I love that music so much. But New Orleans you have to be careful. There's a lot of crime there. The food is amazing. Now that the Neville brothers are no longer a band, but that was a favorite place. I really like London. I like the whole British thing. My wife and I are probably going to come to UK on a vacation in the next 2 years and spend a couple of weeks.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to ask a musician this next question because you've got so many influences. But who would you say is your favorite music artist? I think I know the answer. And what is your favorite album?
Oh God, that's a tough. Well, if I have to pick one band, it's the Stones. But then I have other, but then I like jazz as well. And then but the Stones I got to even put them. I love the Beatles, but I'm going to have to put the Stones for myself even above the Beatles, just a little bit. Plus, they're still a band too, which is great. But so that's, if I have to pick one, it's them. But then they point their fingers to different areas. From being a Stones fan as a kid, I learned about BB King or read something that they said BB King is great or blah, blah, blah. So they point the fingers to other artists, which is really great. They help educate you as a fan. But then I have people in jazz too that are just from my friend Scott Henderson, John Scofield, Mike Stern, Pat Metheny. Those guys in the jazz guitar world are my main guys. So
if you had to pick a favorite album, What would it be? Maybe something that for you is timeless. It reminds you of a particular period in your life, or maybe a favorite Stones album.
Well, there's so many great ones. Get Your Ya-Ya's Out was really big for me, because when I had seen the Gimme Shelter movie, and that's that same tour. That was a big one. Exile on Main Street. There's so many, that's an important one. Of recent albums in the later part of their career, I think Voodoo Lounge is by far my favorite. I think that one is incredible. But boy, it's hard to just pick out one. If I was forced to pick out one, it might be Exile, but but for a guitar playing point of view, I love Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. Love You Live. There was a Ronnie Wood solo that really inspired me off of the Love You Live album, and it was his solo on Can't Always Get What You Want. And if you listen to that, there was a question, well, who's the best second guitar player in the Stones? Mick Taylor played the best solos, or this or that. Arguably, you could make a case for that. Ronnie Wood, though, is to me the most well-rounded in that he can play great solos too. Listen to his solo on that Love You Live album on Can't Always Get You One. It's as great as anything Clapton or anybody ever played. It's amazing. He can play when he wants to. But Ronnie is so diverse, where he can play pedal steel, and he can do this, and he can do that. And Keith Richards likes the interaction of two guitars. He doesn't, where Mick Taylor was a great lead player, soloist, and not as much of an interactor with Keith. And that's what Keith wants, is two guitars to weave in and out of each other, what they call the ancient art of weaving. So Ronnie is the best in the planet for that, with Keith. So sometimes people overlook what a great musician he is, just because he's such a likable, fun guy. It's easy to take his talent for granted, but he's an incredible, brilliant talent, to say the least.
Jimmy, what would you say next is your greatest achievement to date?
My greatest achievement to date, I've been married for 24 years and still married. That's one. That's one. I'm also. I quit drinking. I haven't had a sip of beer or any other drug or anything in 36 years. I'm clean and sober. So I gave all that up when I was in my 20s. So that's kind of an achievement. I'm broadcasting it now. I don't know how many people will see this, but I'm actually proud of that, because that's that initially it takes a little, after not drinking. I don't have anything against, I got most of my friends drink, but having stayed away from that, now I don't miss it. So that's kind of an achievement in a sense,
And finally, Jimmy McIntosh, the last Your Take question. How do you wish to be remembered?
Hopefully as a good guy, hopefully as a good person, and hopefully I guess that's about it. Well liked, hopefully.
Jimmy McIntosh, we come to that moment, the end chapter of our conversation, the end of the interview. It's a wrap, as they say. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the incredible stories. And I must say, listening, it's gone on longer than we said, an hour to start with. And I think we're nearly around about 1 hour 45, something like that. But I honestly think that with all these stories, and there's so many different aspects and angles to them on your journey to becoming a professional musician and guitar player, I think you could write a book. I think there's a book somewhere, the meetings with Ronnie Wood, the friendship, Duke Ellington, and the family links. There's so many things, and I think you should definitely write a book.
Well, I see what you're saying. I've co-written this. This is a history of rock book, which it's a reference book, but I'm saying what you're saying is more about the stories and stuff.
Yeah,
So
because the stories are so interesting.
the cover of this is Ronnie Wood's painting B Stage, which he let us use, but this is it's a textbook that I wrote with Tim Jones, which was a lot of fun. But and Ronnie was kind enough to let us use one of his paintings for the cover. That's what a nice man he is. But I know I see what you're saying about stories, but talking with James, talking with you is just a pleasure, really.
No, thank you kindly for sharing your incredible journey and your stories. And finally, where do we go to hear more of your music and find out more about all the creative stuff you've done?
Well, my CD, now I've got some hard copy CDs, but it's on Spotify or iTunes. I'm on there. I'm not, to tell you the truth, I'm not a very good self-promoter, and I know that's important these days, but I've got several things on YouTube, most of which I've not put up. So Jimmy McIntosh, there's a few things there. You can hear some of my CDs on there. There was a fun gig I did with the sidemen of the Rolling Stones, Bernard Fowler, their backup singer, Tim Reese, their sax player. They were in Vegas. The Stones had a couple of shows, 2016, and I was playing at the Sand Dollar Blues Bar. And Bernard Fowler and Tim Reese came and sat in with us. And one of the first Stones show was canceled due to Mick having laryngitis. So they came and we did a gig back the second night. We backed up Bernard Fowler and Tim Reese and and all these Stones fans, about 300 of them, crammed into a bar that would hold about 150 people. You couldn't even move. That was a lot of fun. And there's a bunch of videos. If you look up Rolling Stones sidemen with Bernard Fowler, Jimmy McIntosh, etc., you can see that whole gig. My wife videotaped that. That was fun. But so I do have some stuff on YouTube, but like I said, I probably should have worked at self-promotion more. but anyway, there you have it.
Thanks for your time today, and all the very best for the future, and for being a guest on Your Take.
Well, thanks so much, James, and thanks to my friend Pete Strobel for getting us in touch with each other. But it's so much fun talking with you. I'd like to learn more about your musical side as well. And it's funny, this amount of time, it's fun talking to you. It feels like we've been talking for 45 minutes. You know?
Yeah, it does indeed. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. We'll keep in touch, okay?